I've had a number of driving jobs, and the majority of those jobs just involved driving locally. Well, some long distance driving, but driving within Canada, specifically within the Canadian province of Ontario. However, I once did have a truck driving job that involved me driving from the Greater Toronto area to the U.S., to the northeastern U.S. I'd be driving to places like New York State, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland, places like those in the northeastern U.S. Anyways, a lot of people may not be aware, but you know how any one of you who have crossed an international border to go from one country to another, you realize that you have to make a declaration. Like you'll be asked if you're bringing any goods from that country that you're traveling from, because they're going to want to know if you're bringing goods in that are subject to taxes or duties, or even goods that might be forbidden or restricted from one country to another. So when you're transporting goods commercially across the border, like I was transporting goods between Canada and the U.S., as well as between the U.S. and Canada. When you transport goods commercially, you have to get special paperwork done up, and you even have people called customs brokers. They deal with doing up that paperwork so that you can take those goods from one country to another. And I guess that's how they enforce things like trade rules, as well as make sure that taxes and duties, and just basically to make sure that laws are followed going between one country and another, and to make sure that any taxes or duties that are due, that they're also paid. So anyways, when I was crossing the border, I'd have to carry customs paperwork with me. So this one particular trucking company I was working for in the city of Mississauga, which is a suburb of Toronto, they were kind of idiots of this company. They were very disorganized. They didn't really know what they were doing. So they often lost things. Well, there was one particular trip they wanted me to take a load from suburban Toronto to Buffalo, New York, or near the Buffalo, New York area. They had lost the paperwork for this particular load. What they wanted me to do, believe it or not, they wanted me to cross the border and tell them at the border that I was running empty, that I didn't have anything in my truck. So I told my workplace, forget it. No way am I going to cross the border and lie to them like that. Like, I was just thinking to myself, are you going to go and sit in jail for me? Yeah, if you take goods from one country to another without declaring it, that's called smuggling. I don't know the exact penalty, but I know that the U.S. government does not take smuggling very lightly at all. I'm sure I probably would have spent several years in jail, so I refused to take that load. I did end up running down to the States empty to pick up a load in the Buffalo, New York area. Now, every previous time that I'd crossed the border between Canada and the U.S., at least for this job anyways, all they just asked was to see my paperwork. None of them actually asked to see my physical load that I was carrying. Well, this one time when I went down there and I told the border guard that I was running empty, guess what he asked me to do? He asked me to pop open the back doors of the truck. So he saw I was empty and I was on my way. But imagine if I'd popped open those back doors after telling him that I was running empty, and he discovered that I had a load that I was trying to smuggle into the States. A truckload. Now, mind you, to the best of my like this trucking company, it was legal stuff we were transporting. So it's not like I was transporting drugs or weapons or anything else that was against the law. But it's against the law to cross an international border without declaring what you're carrying. Who knows how many years I would have sat in jail for that. So I went down there, picked up the load and carried it from one place to another. A few days later, like this really pissed me off. I was still living at home with my parents, so I didn't have to worry about paying for a roof over my head and groceries and that kind of thing. Since I was living at home as an adult, I did contribute financially to assist my parents and all that. I mean, after all, I was still living under their roof. But since I was living at home and since I didn't have to worry about, being evicted and all that kind of stuff, I just decided, you know what, this particular trucking company really left a bad taste in my mouth by them asking me to commit such an illegal act. That just told me that this company couldn't care less about my well-being, couldn't care less about what happened to me. So a few days after they asked me that was the last straw, and I ended up quitting this job. And I ended up hearing a few months later that this particular company ended up going belly up, going out of business, as they should. So basically, your employer cannot ask you to break the law. And if your employer asks you to break the law, tell them forget it. Yes, it might end up costing you your job. And I understand, depending on what part of the world you live in, unemployment in some places is very high. It can be very difficult to find another job depending on where you are and what field you're in. But is it really worth it to risk going to jail or risk safety, risk your life, or risk other people's lives because your employer asks you to break the law? No, it's not. I certainly don't think it would have been worth it for me to end up spending several years in jail and have my parents and sister and other family members and friends having to come visit me in jail and see me there. So, no matter how desperate you are to keep your job, sometimes it's just not worth it, and sometimes it's just time to move on. It was time for me to move on from this place, and I'm glad I did. And that's my story time video.